Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Sketchy A.F podcast. My name is Jonathan, and today I am joined by Kip Alizadeh, the illustrator and visual artist based down in Belfast, who just last month released the book The Wishing Flower, which was written by Irving and illustrated by Kip. And welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm not doing too bad. Slightly sleep deprived from children who don't want to seem to sleep through the night. And I'm sure, as you know, doing art stuff, I've commissions, 9-to-5 job, and just we're rolling on about 3 to 4 hours sleep a night. So that's fun. Thankfully, the caffeine bill in the house now is just through the roof. It's a little bit crazy. So one of the things I always like to kind of start off each episode when I have somebody on by talking a little bit about how I actually came across their work. And I first actually seen your work back in, I believe it was either late January or early February. I went to an event for our children, and it was hosted by Paul Howard. And we went up, and afterwards I went and spoke to Paul because at the time I'd been writing this idea for a script that I had for a children's book, and I was going to write it and illustrate it myself. But at this point, I'd kind of just gotten back into art myself, and I didn't really know what way to go about it. So I had the opportunity to speak to Paul after the event. He told me about Children's Books Belfast, sent me a little link to the group, and I went in there, and it was such a crazy experience for me because I didn't know of the industry for illustrators and children's book writers that were here at home. It was something that I had absolutely no experience of. So I was seeing Paul's work. Obviously, there was Clive as well, had just had a book out at the time, and I came across your work, and I thought, like, I was really drawn to your work right from the beginning because it was just, there was such a unique quality to it. And I couldn't put my finger on what it was that made your work stand out to me as much as it did. And then it wasn't until I followed you on Instagram and you had posted up different images of the process of how you went about your art. And it was such a unique approach that I felt that you took. You had mentioned, obviously, most people would probably be digital illustrators or they would work purely traditional. You kind of do backgrounds and textures in like almost like a watercolor wash, and then you've drawn other things that you put them onto a computer and digitally put them together. It kind of made me think of like it's almost like a digital collage, but I thought it was such a unique approach to producing your work, and that's why I think it stood out, and that's how I came across your work. I just thought it was absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
No, you're very welcome. One of the things that I do like to ask people as well, of course, a big part of what I do here over on the YouTube channel is I talked a lot about my journey in art. I had been away, I hadn't been practicing art for over a decade, and then was documenting my journey of getting back into being a practicing artist. And I always love to hear the story that other artists have about how they first discovered their love of art. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you came across art and how that came into your life, if there was big kind of inspirations and people that you met along your journey who helped kind of push you in this direction.
Sure. I've always been into like drawing,
Yeah.
ever since I was little. I think I used it as a form of escapism.
Uh-huh.
I used to really love the Horrible Histories books,
Yeah.
with all the funny drawings in them, and I used to copy loads of those drawings. And then as I got older, um, I didn't do art GCSE because I was a bit of a rebel and I didn't like the idea of art being marked. Like
Yeah.
teenage me thought that was like not good. But then I got to A level and I decided that I wanted to go to art school
Yeah.
after I finished, like high school. So I brought a sketchbook, put a sketchbook together of different work, and took it to the head of art, and he was really encouraging. And I think he was probably a key figure in like making me think I could actually like make something of this, and I was actually good at it, and I could make a job of it.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, he was definitely someone. I think teachers can be really powerful in that way of seeing something in a student and pushing them towards something that they're
Yeah.
good at. He was called Dr. Griffin. I remember when I ended up going to Falmouth School of Art, Falmouth University, I think it's called now, and somewhere in those years, ended up showing my sketchbook to Quentin Blake, um,
Wow.
which at an event in London, which was, and he lived through it, and he was like very complimentary, and that was like amazing as well.
That's a pretty good
Um,
seal of approval.
yeah,
Yeah. Wow.
so that really spurred me on my way as well. Those are like a couple of like formative experiences I can
Yeah.
think of that sort of got me on my way, I think.
That's amazing. So Quentin
Yeah.
Blake, how was that experience? How was Quentin?
He was he I don't know, it's just like when you meet illustrators, they're kind of like normal people.
Yeah.
But he had this sort of, yeah, aura about him because I was just amazed.
Yeah.
Um, and he was just, we sort of queued up to have our sketchbooks looked at, and he just was going quite, his glasses on, I think, and he was just going through it quite quickly. But yeah, it's just amazing.
Wow. So
Yeah.
in terms of then after education, I'd read I don't know if it was on maybe just even your bio on Instagram, or it might have actually been part of, no, I you were doing some posts for Children's Book Belfast's Instagram page over the last month, and you were kind of talking a little bit about, your life and your journey in art. And one of the things, you mentioned obviously in that going to university, once you left university, in terms of getting into the industry and becoming a working artist, how did, I think a lot of people I speak to, and a lot of people who I would know just in my personal life who are artists, that's definitely one of the more challenging things that I think people encounter. Because with education, it's there and you can go when you have the choice to go and study it. When you get out into the idea of having to pursue it, then as a means of making a living, it's always such an interesting story, because people, when you're a creative, whenever you have any of these artistic outlets, when you then make it a job, it does slightly shift this thing that you always loved as a passion. For me personally, I went and studied graphic design. I got my job, or I got my degree as a graphic designer, and then went on to get a job. And then when I got the job, I kind of, it changed this thing that I loved, and that was almost a form of escapism. It was something that was very therapeutic for me my whole life, and it became this thing that I felt pressure about. And I didn't particularly thrive in the more commercial sense of that work. So I was just curious, when you left education and began to be a practicing artist, how did you approach that?
I was fortunate in that my last year of my degree, we had a module called professional practice, and we got taught how to sort of approach whatever form of illustration we wanted to go into. So for
Yeah,
me, that was publishing. So I learned how to approach publishers. I went on a trip to Bologna Book Fair with a few of my
yeah,
like classmates, and sort of met up with some publishers there. Um, and we were told like, very much it's about like submitting your work and getting feedback and trying to go into bookshops and looking at publishers who have like similar stories
yeah,
to the ones you want to tell, and sort of researching the market and trying to look for email addresses and things like that. They're doing a lot of research basically.
yeah.
Um, and I definitely sort of balance that with having jobs, like paid job, like working in a coffee shop, that kind of thing,
Yeah.
for a good few years, because um, it is very hard to build up a client list. It takes a number of years. You have to sort of get your name out there. It's a bit of a grind.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I just sort of love drawing.
Hmm.
and I thought when I went to university, I thought I had these. I could either. I thought illustration was like a commercially viable way of doing like what I
Yeah.
love to do. I'm just quite a stubborn person, and I kind of just stuck with it. Kept sending my story. I ended up sending my graduate project that I ended up sending that to a few publishers, and eventually that got published by Child's Play. It went through a lot of changes. So I graduated in 2013, but and it was published in 2017 after going through a lot of back and forth with various publishers, and eventually reaching the format it did with Child's Play. And once I
Yeah.
had that under my belt, I approached my current agent saying, "Look, I have a book out now, and here's my portfolio." And um, to my surprise, because they are like a small agency, someone was interested, and I've sort of stuck with them ever since. And I think, yeah, having an agent is a real game changer if you have a good
Yeah.
relationship with them, for sure.
I
Yeah.
think it's even great that they had that in your university, the idea of how to approach it. Like that was something that was definitely missing whenever, especially when I think like I would have rather have went and did illustration if I'm being completely honest. It was where my love had always been. And the reason that I ended up pursuing graphic design instead of following fine art or illustration was because I didn't understand. Like I thought I would have to take this sort of skill and this idea of wanting to do something creatively and take it in more of a commercial way that I wasn't sure if being a living artist was going to be something that was viable for a career, because I think that, we've all heard the idea of the starving artist. It's a thing that people have always heard. And it was odd because I had a teacher who was an art teacher of all things. And they said to me, like, focus on things that are more commercial because the likelihood of being able to make a income that can support you in your life through just art is so limited. It's not really an opportunity that everybody gets. And in some ways, I mean, there's truth to that. Not everybody can go and do it. And I have like a 9 to 5 job, as you had mentioned, still to this day because I love not being evicted and homeless. So I do that. So I kind of approached it in completely the wrong way. I went and pursued the thing that I thought I should do rather than following the thing that I knew I wanted to do. And I kind of thought it was interesting. You said that you were stubborn, and so you were adamant that you were going to follow it. I wasn't. I quit my job as a graphic designer, took a big log absence from doing anything creative because it was such a negative experience. And I remember coming out of it thinking, God, I really don't like this thing. Have I wasted all these years of education pursuing something that I'm not passionate about? And the one thing, I wasn't stubborn, but my love of art was stubborn, because over the course of those 10 years, there would be no point where I didn't have the voice in the back of my head saying, go and draw again, go and do it. And it was pushing me and pushing me and pushing me. But it took a long time and a lot of kind of my own personal growth before I felt that I was able to go and do it again, and I was able to try and take it seriously. And I just thought it's great to hear that there are some educational institutions that do offer that kind of support to students, because that was something we hugely missed. I mean, I'd mentioned earlier that I'd met Paul Howard at this event back in January, and I had no idea how to go about approaching the industry for publishing children's books. And so I kind of, we were there and he was doing this great thing. We had our kids there and there was a lot of other kids, and Paul's very good at handling them. He was very interactive, and I'm watching him and he's there doing this thing for children. And I went up to him after the event had ended and asked him, hi, Paul, I'm just getting back into illustration. I want to do this, blah, blah, blah. Could you, give me any advice? And when I look back on it, I was probably like, he was like, yeah, what do you need to know about? And I was probably just going, what do I do? Like I have nothing. Like what exactly do I do? And thankfully, like he didn't have to sit there and take the time to talk away to me, but he was such an encouraging person, and it was great. A lot of that was me reopening to the art community and reopening to people, because in that time I was away from art, I was very reclusive. And I mentioned it in the last podcast that I did. During that time where I wasn't practicing any art, it was a bad time in my life. Like, your mental health takes a really big hit when you don't feel like you have an outlet for your creativity, especially when it's a crutch you've had your whole life. It's always been the thing that you find solace in. And so not having it, that was, a really sort of hard time in my life. And then getting back into it, you're very, very trepidatious. You're very careful. And then when you see people like Paul and you see the kind of stuff that whenever you're posting your work up on Instagram, and in general, the art community, they're so welcoming, they're so encouraging. And for the most part, particularly in my own experience, you won't meet more people who build you up, who encourage the stuff that you do. And it was just a sort of really, really great experience. But hearing that, you have actual parts of your university that teach it, like that's something that I really hope that's just the norm in universities now, because it probably would help me an awful lot back then. And I mentioned at the start of the podcast, Last month saw the release of The Wishing Flower. And that was, I actually reached out to you for the podcast when I seen your tweet over on Twitter about the book coming out. And I read about what it was all about. And The Wishing Flower, it is this LBGTQ inclusive children's book, which is just, it's so great to see that they have this kind of children's literature nowadays. Like we have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and we read children's books to them all the time. We would bring them to the library. And when I seen the post about The Wishing Flower, that was actually the first LBGTQ inclusive children's book that I'd ever come across. Because even in our libraries now, it's not something that I had seen. And I suppose if I thought, like, of course, there will have been examples of it previously, but it just didn't seem accessible. It didn't seem as if it was promoted that well through the library systems or in bookshops that we would go to. But I just thought it was such an incredible idea. And to have something like that for younger people growing up, I just think it was such a great idea. I was wondering, that entire project, where did this all begin? When was the first time that you had any contact regarding the project?
When was that? It was a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And I got sent the how it usually works is a publisher will approach my agent with a text. So that's what happened, and my agent then forwards the text on to me. And I got the text and I read it and I just cried because I was like, wow, this is like
Yeah.
my how I felt at when I was that age in writing, like someone's written about it. Um,
Yeah.
and that is incredible. And I really connected with it and I was like, yes, I have to absolutely like illustrate this text.
Yeah.
Yeah, some books are like more like maybe jobs and others are like, oh my god, this is like, and I'm
Like a
lucky I get to
passion
work.
project
Yeah,
almost.
I'm lucky
Yeah.
I get to work on a lot of those kind of books actually. Like books that I really believe in, and The Wishing Flower, like, oh, it's just incredible to get a text like that come my way and be able to illustrate it. I feel very lucky.
It's such like it is such a great book. And anyone out there, if they're watching this and you have young kids, this is a book. There'll be links all below the video to go and check it out. It's such a good book. The story behind it is so good, and it's so brilliantly written. Your illustrations in particular are just they're amazing in it. The one particular page, the little spread in it, the sunset
Oh yeah.
spread, and you've got Birdie and Sunny are playing. The birds are flying over. Like it's such a beautiful image, and I just whenever I kind of looked at that, I remember thinking, "Wow, like this is incredible," and it is such a good book. And then obviously being released, and you're leading into Pride Month, there's a lot of more push of then promoting those kind of books around this time. But I just think the idea of I certainly know that whenever I grew up, there just wouldn't have been literature that promoted it in any sort of way. And to see that it is there and it's there for younger people now, who there is more representation in media for not just the LBGTQ, but for everything that's we live in a more inclusive society, and it's great for especially at those younger ages, at those younger reading ages, that children can then have stories that they can identify with. Because I would imagine, I've never been in this situation, but I've spoke to friends who have been in the LGBTQ community, and when they've talked about their experiences growing up, they've always known, perhaps not completely fully, but there's been some kind of subconscious awareness that there's something in them that they felt was maybe different than what they were seeing portrayed in mainstream media. And obviously, it's not maybe till later in their life that the pieces kind of come together and they can get a clearer idea of that. So to be able to maybe not have that confusion at that young age, to be able to find that you can identify with characters in books, the for you, this is a great project. It's something that you care about and it's something that you're passionate about. Do you ever think about the very serious positive implications that that could have on young readers, or is that something that's so big that it's hard for you to maybe consider, or how do you approach that?
That's something I do think about. I like because I didn't have any like representation growing up, and
Yeah.
I grew up in quite a conservative home,
Uh
and I
huh.
used to find a lot of escapism and solace and solidarity by going and get books from the library with characters that I kind of felt close to.
Yeah.
So like I I really believe in like yeah, like the books being able to connect to young people. and
Yeah.
like them feeling like the best messages I get are from people who say, "Oh, we got your book and um, we feel seen," or something like that.
Yeah.
That's what keeps me going, because um, it's so important to like see yourself in media. It makes you feel like more confident and
Yeah.
powerful and able to do things, and we need more of that for sure.
Yeah. No, that it's brilliant. Like the idea that I do generally think that whenever we see books like The Wishing Flower and like all the other great books that have been promoted over the last month over on Children's Book Belfast's Instagram page, I mean, that's just going to have such a huge effect. Like you do see so much stuff in the news, and I know definitely people that I know personally in my life who they've grown up and they've suffered from really really hard times, and there's things that they've really struggled with, and it's because they didn't feel like they were seen, because they felt like they were an outcast or they were different or in some way that there was anything wrong with just being the human being that they are. And I think that having that kind of just a representation in media in general and having that literature for people, it's going to make a huge, huge difference to the generation of people that are growing up. Like it's not just a book. It's something that really could make a massive, massive impact on people's lives. And I think that people like yourself, people like AJ Irving, everyone else who's putting these books out, it's an incredible thing. And it's great to see it be given the importance now and given the platform and to be pushed by so many publishers, so many bookshops who make the big stands, who really push this work out and promote that message. It's a fantastic thing to see. And I always felt that with growing up. I remember ever since we got into kind of teenage years where there were people who were coming out and they were being who they wanted to be. There's always been people in our friends groups who are part of the LBGT community who are, they have their own sexual identity. They've accepted who they are and they've been open about it. And they've always been friends that we've had. And so I was always coming from the approach of, well, these people are my friends. It doesn't matter anything about them. And then when you become a father of children, it changes something, like so much stuff in your mind changes, but you do think so much about, you want the best for them. You start to worry so much about absolutely every little aspect of their life. And the fact that it was something I was conscious of, that we would go to the library regularly, we would go up to the little floor here in our local library that has all the children's books, and the fact that it wasn't something that I had seen. And I remember I used to sort of think and question that. I used to think, well, is this something that, is there literature for this? Is this seen as like something that was maybe a taboo subject for kids literature? Were there publishers who were brave enough to go and to put these stories out and to have them there for a younger audience? And I always wondered about that sort of thing. And it's great to have it there, and it's great now to have the Wishing Flower is the first LBGTQ inclusive children's book that our kids will be read, and it's just great to have that sort of thing. And it's just such a wonderful book, and it's so great that the stuff that you're doing, it makes a massive, massive difference.
That is amazing to know. Um, Thanks.
No, you're very welcome. I'd seen whenever I was kind of looking up, you have another book coming out next year. It's the he, she, z, and they. Is that the?
Yeah, it's hooray for she, he, ze, and they.
Uh-huh.
Um,
I'd seen that coming up, and because I know the author Linda, she has the great YouTube channel as well, and she does the Rainbow Parenting podcast too. So she does really, really great work, and I know the cover reveal came out quite recently. Uh, is there anything you can tell us about that book, or is it still kept quite
um,
under wraps for the
I
time?
can show you. I have the cover there.
Yeah,
Um, but it's all quite under wraps as far as I know. I was quite surprised when the cover reveal happened. I didn't expect
yeah,
it to happen so quickly. Um, what else can I? Yeah, it's just a celebration of pronouns and gender euphoria,
yeah,
like being happy in yourself. And both Linz and I are non-binary, so it's really cool
yeah.
to have that like collaboration and like shared experience, and be able to kind of make a book together about celebrating being yourself. Is, yeah,
Yeah.
that's probably most I can say right now, but I'm really
Yeah,
excited about
Lindsay's been
it.
making a big splash with the stuff she's doing over on YouTube. Is it Queer Kid Stuff? Is that the name of the? I don't want to get the channel wrong. I believe that's what it is. It's another thing that I'll link down below. But she does so much stuff over there
Oh yeah,
for again.
Lindsay's pronouns are they and them, just so
Oh, sorry,
sorry.
apologies for that.
Um,
They do great stuff over on YouTube with that channel, and it'll be linked below to go over and check it out.
cool.
Um, one of the things like I had last week, an illustrator from Ireland called John Fitzgerald. Really great guy, tremendous artist. One of the things that I first came across of his work was 2 years ago. He did this illustration of Lou, the character from Irish mythology, and at the time he lived down in Donegal, and there was a celebration going on the Hill of Tara, and he went there and he had seen that there were these kind of, his description was, I think there were these right wing fascist type people who showed up to the celebration and they brought their kind of radical politics, and he felt so kind of angered by people trying to bring their politics and such horrible politics into, you know, a celebration that was there for everyone. And he went and created the illustration of this character Lou on the horse, stood on the Hill of Tara holding the pride flag. And this illustration, it started to get quite a lot of attention. And I remember that it's the only thing that he did where he had to close down the comment section of his illustration because he was just, as you might imagine, social media being the not always great place that it should be, he was getting horrible comments coming in just because of him representing the idea that people are equal and it doesn't matter who people love, it doesn't change who they are. Yet there were all these comments, and I was curious with your own work and the type of work that you'll be putting out. Have you ever had instances where you've had to encounter people who are, I'll be very choice with my words here, narrow-minded and living, you know, in a life that's not suited for the current day society that we live in?
By and large, like you said earlier, the KidsLit community itself is very inclusive, very supportive. Like when I came out as non-binary, when I changed my name, I expected the worst, and
Yeah,
everyone has been really lovely. I have had some brush-ins with people who have terrible opinions.
yeah,
But by and large, I'm unscathed so far. I've seen other people get piled on, and it's horrific.
yeah.
Because we're just trying to get these books out to kids that and it's important. Um, but I'm constantly aware that it could happen. I think it does have an impact on my mental health sometimes,
Yeah.
and it can be a struggle sometimes. Um, and then I escape into drawing again, and you know that empowers me. But yeah, I'm constantly like careful online. Sometimes I keep a lower profile on purpose, but I've never actually had a pile on so far, thankfully.
Well, good, and hopefully that will always remain the case
Yeah.
because it it's so strange that obviously a lot of the times when you see these people come and they leave certain comments, it'll be some, you know, faceless account of someone who's, you know, sat and for whatever reason, mostly I would always imagine it's down to some deep unhappiness within themselves that they decide that they have to lash out at other communities in a way to make themselves feel better. But I kind of was wondering then, you know, obviously being in the kids lit community, it's something that I did wonder. I was like, oh God, I hope that people don't take that approach, because you do see the people who are, you know, they, oh, you don't bring these things up to kids, and they have that weird approach to things where the reality is, no, people who should be seen, it's much more beneficial for them and their mental health, their well being, and just being a good human being that they have that representation. Yet there does still seem to be, hopefully I would imagine, a minority of people these days, you know, that have that outlook. But good to see that that's not something you've encountered. And it's, as you mentioned, you know, I do see all the kind of comments that get left on the stuff that you put up, and it is very encouraging, and it's great, particularly I suppose with the practitioners who write and who illustrate stuff within the kids lit area. They are going to be very supportive, and we do see a bigger push now. Like there's so many of the titles that you'd put out in your posts about the LBGT children's books that were being released, that I'd never seen. They weren't things that I'd ever encountered. I didn't, I wasn't lucky enough to have them in areas where we were going getting books, but to see that there is such a bigger library there now, that there has been this resurgence, or not resurgence, but this rise in
Mm.
publishers wanting to put out these important sort of stories. It was great to see that that is present, and that's something that we have, and that you're not having to be subject to any of those things. So what are the next projects that you will be approaching? We've obviously mentioned that you're going to be doing the book that'll be coming out next year. I did see that you put out a tweet this morning. You did a little sort of doodle where you said you were working on something of was it girls who felt like boys, or something in that little
Oh
tweet that you
yeah.
put up?
I've been encouraged by my friend Clara, who also writes kids books and
Yeah.
illustrates kids books, and she was like, "Why don't you try writing a chapter book, um, and from a perspective and experience that's unique to you?" I've always thought chapter books look kind of fun, so
Yeah.
I'm trying my hand at that at the moment. That's not commissioned or anything. That's a
Yeah.
purely like personal project. And I am working on another picture book right now. That's It's not specifically LGBTQ. It's just about celebrating the like everyday moments in life,
Yeah.
um, and sort of being present and like enjoying each moment as it comes. And um, that's a story by Josh Funk.
Uh-huh.
um, and I think in those kind of books I do still try and include diverse characters, because I
Yeah.
think it's important that people see that we're just like normal. We just want to kind of, I'm very much of the opinion like we just want to get on with our lives and
Yeah.
enjoy things like everyone else. We don't want to be like activists all the time. We're just like in the world and alongside everyone else. So I try and show that in all my books.
I did. I was speaking about it actually last week on one of the episodes, that away from the children's book idea that I'd been working on, I did have this other thing that I had written that it's not in the kind of children's literature area. It was another story that I kind of wrote as like a passion project. And when I was thinking about the characters that went into it, that was one of the things, because you just kind of mentioned it. I did want to include their, like, to have a diverse and representative range of characters in it, but their diversity not to be a central theme of the story. Like, because I think that's a big part of, people should be able to see themselves just being a human being too. Like they don't, that doesn't have to be their narrative. And I'm sure, anyone, like, if you were sitting in a situation where you would identify as heterosexual, you don't consider that part of your identity. So why should that be the case with anyone who identifies with a different kind of sexuality? So I tried to keep that sort of idea in my mind whenever I was writing it, because I think that's, again, another important thing. And it's interesting to see that, that's something that you were kind of including. That is writing something that you do plan to go more into in the future going forward. Like, was it ever one of your aspirations?
Um, Not as much as drawing. I have written one book called Quiet. That was my first book, my debut.
Oh, okay.
But I've not written since then. Um, and I got a little bit of imposter syndrome about it, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I do want to sort of try my hand at it, because I think the more marginalized and diverse people who are using their voices to tell stories, the better. And I sort of want to write these characters that are like me.
Yeah.
And like I did that tweet and I put that character up, like we girls who feel like we boys in
Yeah.
various ways, but it's sort of a tongue-in-cheek way of sort of looking at like embodying masculinity in someone who's not like grown up as a boy,
Yeah.
and then a man. Like, because there's plenty of us in the world, and I don't feel like, I feel like we can be quite invisible sometimes, and I feel like I have this position where I can tell stories, I can draw pictures, and they get published. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna try and use that voice to tell those stories about people like me, because I'm sure there's many kids who are like gender bendy or feel different, girls who feel like boys, or boys who don't know they're boys yet, that or
Yeah.
that kind of thing, you know, like, and just help people, like little kids, like find themselves a little bit, and see themselves in stories. So I think writing is something I can push myself to do, to sort of do that a bit more, like have
Yeah.
a bit more of a voice, I think.
So especially, I suppose you're talking about bringing your own perspective and stories that are more befitting to you, so that there will be more of an audience who can connect with it too. And you'd mentioned, you had a very conservative upbringing, and I mean that's definitely something that I'm sure is difficult whenever you're trying to kind of find your own identity, and the idea of them being able to turn that into a story. Because I'm sure there's plenty of people in a similar situation. Well, I know certainly there are people that I know as well who've been in similar situations, and then the idea of having that represented would be a great thing too. One of the things as well I wanted to talk about, your approach to illustration that I mentioned right at the very beginning of the show. I find so interesting because it isn't something that I had really seen an awful lot of before. I would kind of, a lot of the work that I would do would be digital based, and the way in which you approached it was different from what I would see from other traditional practitioners in the art world. I'd never seen people work where they would do the backgrounds and the textures and build the image up in that way. Was there any, like, how did you come across like that technique? Was there any artists that you've seen that did it? Is it something that just felt right for you? How did you kind of find that style?
Oh, it's been a long journey, I think. um, I I've always loved using traditional materials. Um, I did have a stint where I was drawing on the iPad and didn't quite enjoy it
Yeah.
because there's not that kind of contact, um, and unpredictability slightly that you get with traditional materials. But then on the flip side, you have to use those materials in a consistent way because you're trying to have a consistent visual
Yeah,
language.
style in it.
Yeah. So I sort of reached this style where I sort of use watercolors and stuff for the background. So the backgrounds can be quite loose, expressive, and then I use a pencil, um, to varying degrees of sharpness for the characters, and I sort of scan it all in,
Yeah.
and I layer it in Photoshop so that it can be tightened, and edited, when it goes to publishers, and changed easily. So the
Yeah.
digital aspect allows more flexibility, without a lot of effort. Like there's still effort, but it's not as much as having to redraw something all over
Yeah, just a
again.
little bit more freedom, I suppose, for tightening
Yeah,
up those kind of final pages. I
yeah.
mean, the technique, was that something, did you do, was there other artists that you came across who did it in that way, or is that just a kind of way that you find worked well for the kind of images that you were trying to produce?
I think my agent sort of picked up on the pencil line that I used
Yeah.
and said, "Look, this is really unique. Try pushing this."
Yeah.
So that's kind of where that came from, because I was using all different types of line before that. I think I've looked at kind of Studio Ghibli,
Yeah.
um, before, a lot of like Peanuts cartoons.
Yeah.
It's all sorts
Oh,
of,
do you know what? I definitely would actually see a slight link with that and your
yeah,
illustration style. That's quite an interesting one. But I can, as soon as you mention it, it's like, oh yeah, I kind of get that.
yeah. So yeah, I guess cartoons in a way, manga, anime, um, influences it, and also just enjoying playing with watercolors. I guess I would enjoy impressionist paintings and
Yeah.
the way they layer and paint to create different colors and emotions,
Uh huh.
and Rothko paintings where he
Yeah.
just has these color blocks and they make you like feel stuff. Like that's really inspiring to me. So I suppose like I like looking at painters a lot for inspiration for my backgrounds, and then cartoons and stuff for my inspiration for characters, and hopefully those two together create like this emotional, where you're engaged by the character and sort of drawn in by the background. Um, that kind of effect.
That
Um,
kind of, it's just when you were mentioning about impressionism, like the impressionism would have been the art movement that It was the biggest impact that any art movement that I would have studied in education. It was the one that grabbed me and had the biggest impact on my love of art. And we would have done, I don't know if you would have, if it would have been the same thing. We had like, art history as one of our courses where you had to go back and you're looking through all these different art movements, and impressionism was that one that I just thought there's an atmosphere to a lot of those impressionist landscapes that would have been painted. And now that you're kind of mentioning that being an influence, I can see that too, especially the one I talked about earlier in this episode, that sunset image at the end of the wishing flower. I can get ideas of the idea of color conveying that emotion through impressionism. Like I can see that that's definitely there, and it's definitely something then that comes
Cool.
through in the work. So I can see that whatever residual effects that has, it's definitely come through in the work. I
Good.
just needed someone to join all those little dots for me.
Thank you. That's really good to hear.
No problem at all. Thank you very much for coming on the show. It was really, really great sitting down and talking to you. As I mentioned earlier in the video, there are going to be links to all of Kip's social media. There's going to be a link to pick up the wishing flower down there below. So do make sure that you head on over, check out the social media, follow the work of Kip over there, pick up the books, and I'll see you again in the next one.